Hey there everyone, welcome back to You Enjoyed Life. I've been getting a lot of requests to do sort of an overview of my food forest. So I want to give you a bit of a tour today, talk to you about some design principles, my philosophy around growing. I'm still learning, I've only been doing this for 2 years. Coming from New York City, I didn't know much about growing, but it's just been kind of taking over my life, something I'm super passionate about. I've been reading a lot of books, things like Gaia's Garden. I'm watching a lot of videos. I've done different workshops at this point now. And here comes Rhea. Where do you go? Where do you go? I'll go get you. I'm gonna go get you. So let's start with some of the basics of what I'm doing. So if you know anything about permaculture, it's this idea of permanent agriculture. So you're putting things in place that are going to continually feed you over time. So the concept of food forest, it's just like any forest. When you look into a forest, things are totally open and random and they're just happening, but everything has a place. No one's going in there and pruning and watering and fertilizing. It's just like, it's a circle of life. So as the leaves fall, as trees fall, things get mulched, things get fed. It's just like, it's all happening. So the idea behind a food forest is to try to recreate as much as possible, that sort of natural experience, but with mostly edible things. So everything I'm growing is either edible or it serves a purpose to produce. So some things attract pollinators. You might not be able to eat the flower, but it attracts bees, which then pollinate the fruit. Some things ward off pests. Some things help fix nitrogen. There's all these different principles, and I'm no expert, but I'm learning as I go. And just to give you a little overview of the land. So when we first bought this property, it was pretty beat up, just completely overgrown with weeds. You can still see there's some areas I haven't done anything to. These sort of different grasses and stuff are kind of, they just do their thing. It's a slow process. But when we first got this land, it was totally beat up. The fence was not there. It was just like all these kind of old, overgrown, just kind of random trees and like a really beat up fence. We had that removed. We had the fence put in, which we actually just recently stained. And then I started planting. And my first year of planting, I didn't know anything about permaculture other than a few things my friend told me. And there goes the ambulance. Even though we're not in New York City anymore, I still hear the ambulances sometimes. Just gotta pray for those people, hope they're okay, everything's gonna work out. So one of the main principles of permaculture is that you're supposed to observe the land for a year, live on the land for a year, observe, check out the the wind patterns, where it gets sun, where it gets shade, how things react to different, what your weather is essentially. So not knowing that, I completely skipped that and I just started planting trees. Now luckily I didn't plant too much my first year, so by the time I really started planting I knew a lot more. But just to kind of go over this, so this is south facing, so all this gets southern sun throughout the day. So the sun rises from there, goes up over here, and sets in the west. So we have south, west, east, and north, which is really nice because I have all this space with a ton of sun. Now every place you live is going to be different. Just like every oven you cook in is going to be different. Every place you live in is going to be very different. So Colorado, specifically Denver, we have a lot of things that we have to deal with. It gets extremely hot here. It gets extremely dry. It's extremely sunny, but also we get a lot of hail. So those are probably the biggest things. The sun is great, but sometimes like full sun, when you look at a plant, it says like full sun, 6+ hours. Now we're up almost a mile, so over 5,000 feet, which means the sun is stronger here. So 6 hours somewhere else is not 6 hours of sun here. So these are things I've been learning about. When I first came in, I didn't know a lot of this stuff. Same with hail. A lot of things get hail damage because it hailed. It's literally middle of July. It hailed 2 days ago. Big hailstorm. And when I first came out, I was like so freaked out about that and trying to cover everything. And I would take these tarps and throw everything on my plants. And I didn't have that much of the time, so I could do it. But now I just trust. Whatever gets hit, and whatever doesn't. It's survival of the fittest out here. That's kind of the number one thing I got going on. So the very first thing that I did in my yard was I planted this tree, a Braeburn apple. I planted a Honeycrisp. I planted a peach. And I planted a plum over here. And people were saying, oh, they're pretty close. You want to make sure you have a certain amount of space, like those two. But I was just trusting. I didn't know why. I just knew I wanted to get a lot of fruit in here. And so in my last video, I talked a lot about, kind of the process of planting trees and the things I learned. So I'm not going to get into that today. But that was the first thing I did. And then last year was when I really started to ramp things up. I started planting a lot of fruit trees. So I planted 2 cherry trees. I planted a pear tree there. I planted another pear tree. And also, I should say, my first year, I planted all of these berries over here. So originally, like I said, I had a couple fruit trees in, and then I had, these are like blackberries, raspberries. I even planted some goji berries, some gooseberries, and look, there's a little bee pollinating on those berries right there. And then I had this here. So this is my first area. I was like, okay, there used to be an old shed here. It was this old beat up shed. We posted it on Craigslist. Someone took it away for free. It's kind of a win-win situation. Cleared it out. I got the soil tested because I didn't know. I'm sitting under a shed for a long time. My friend checked it out, and he's like, you actually have really good soil. You just need to amend it with some compost. So I put in a couple bags of compost, and then I just started planting here. Now, originally, this is kind of your standard like rectangular bed with just rows and rows and rows. Now, one thing in permaculture that's really interesting is this concept of keyhole gardens. And what they do is they try to maximize space. So this isn't exactly keyhole by any means, but kind of following the general concept where in the center, I have an opening right here, right? So in the center, I have an opening where I can walk and I can get to all the plants. And I plant all around. That way I can get to it from over there and from over here. And this is just kind of an idea. I wasn't doing too much into the design. Look at these little shallots right here coming in hot. But I wanted to try out this general concept where I had this whole middle space open, and it's actually working out pretty well. Now, one thing I will note is I didn't do too much to this soil this year. You know, I mulched it, but I wasn't so focused on this. So my production of my fruits, and well, tomatoes are fruits, but my vegetables, they're kind of small. These are actually doing okay. My tomatoes haven't grown that big. I'm getting a lot of peas over there, but you'll see some things just like are not doing that well. That tomato's not doing so well. The pepper's not doing so well. I planted these a few months ago. Another thing about Colorado is our growing season is short, and it depends on the year. So this year I came back from Peru June 1st. I didn't put anything in the ground till like June 5th or 6th. And that's kind of a normal thing in Colorado because we do get these late frosts, which people plant their stuff mid-May and then it all gets wiped out. So I'm just learning, you know what, I'm gonna start later. And then it gives you sort of June before things get super hot. June wasn't actually extremely hot. May was pretty cold. So things just take longer. And if we don't have a late frost until October, then I have, you know, through September and even part of October. So I don't know what will happen, but you know, again, I'm learning and I'm trusting. And this year I'm not so focused on growing vegetables. I'm more focused on perennials. This is an onion that I want to show you that I just think is, everyone looks at this, they're like, what is that? I just think it's so beautiful, the onion bloom. You can see it down there. There's a couple of them popping and I get hot. So one kind of first thing I want to mention is that, you know, perennials, if you don't know this, there are obviously a lot of people out there that know a lot more than I do, but for those of you who are interested, perennials are things that come back year after year. Annuals are things you have to plant every single year, and biannuals come back, you know, every other, like, so you have 2 years, then you have to replant them. Now there's some things to know about that. When you just hear that, there's this assumption like, okay, it's just that simple. But perennials don't live forever. So some live a long time. Certain fruit trees last, you know, 50, 60 years. Other ones might be 20 years. Also, things that are annual that you have to plant every year, while that's technically true, if you let things go to seed, like this cilantro, if you see here, it's actually starting to, so once it turns into a flower, then it goes to seed, which you can kind of start to see here. When it goes to, oh yeah, look at all, wow, I didn't even notice all these seeds. So that would be coriander. So if you know the spice coriander, that's what we're actually making right now. So once that drops in the ground, I can throw that around, then even though it's an annual, it will come back next year, whatever seeds actually make it. So yes, they're technically annuals and you have to replant them and you can go to the store and buy new ones or reseed them, but if you let them reseed, they just keep coming back as well. So everything has, you know, a seed, everything has a way to kind of recreate itself to procreate, essentially. So that's something that you should, you know, kind of take the interest. Oh wow, check this out. So these are my goji berries and they're actually just starting to flower. I forgot they flower really late. I was like, oh, I guess I didn't get gojis this year, but they actually are just starting to flower now, and we're in July. So the reason I wanted to do mostly perennials is because it takes a lot of work up front, but once you plant the thing, as long as you care for it, it will keep producing year after year after year. And that's a huge part of a food forest. There's a ton of early work. You know, you're bringing in soil and different resources, and you're planting. But once it's going, you know, in a couple years, once these trees are, let's say in like 5 years, once these trees have gotten pretty big, this is going to be a full-on forest. And there's going to be food everywhere, and the idea is just to get to walk around and just pick whatever I want, just pick different herbs and things. So I am growing annuals, but I'm not as focused on, the tomatoes and the cucumbers and things as I was last year, because I want to focus this year on building healthy soil and getting, perennials in and maximizing my space and my process and learning, and then next year I can start getting back into that. So I am still planting a lot of tomatoes. I'm just not putting in as much time and care as I normally would to those, and focusing more on just overall soil health, because that's a huge thing. So no matter where you live, if you don't have healthy soil, you're going to have some problems. The importance of healthy soil is that, of course, it feeds the plants, and a really good soil can hold moisture well, but also can drain well. A really good soil has a ton of nutrients and micro whatever the heck that fit in the word. There's so many different sciencey words I'm not the best at, but there's a lot of diversity, you can say. So there's a lot of different funguses and bugs and things that grow in that soil. Because what happens is, like, when you have soil that's really hard, so if you look at some of this old soil here, it's like, it's clay, it's really hard, it just kind of like doesn't have much life into it. But when you find good soil, and even like my soil here, because I've been mulching it and working on it, when you pull down in here, you can see it's starting to it's still, got some of that clay in it, which is, clay is fine to a certain extent, but it's starting to get, nicer. And that's a big thing, to have soil that you can really work. Let's see, that one's kind of a bad example. Let's see, maybe over here. So as the wood chips break down, it kind of feeds the soil. And yeah, this is like, this is starting to become good soil. You see that sort of breakdown right there. So having good soil health is the most important thing, because when the plants can get their roots in there and it's not too hard and compact and it's loose, and they can put their roots through and they can eat the soil, essentially suck all the nutrients out, they can grow really well, and they support, healthy bacteria that are in there that support the roots, and that everything goes well. So soil life is so important. Of course, for me, watering is important, so I did put in this drip system. Last year I didn't. It was a pain to water all the time, and now just every couple of days this thing turns on and just basically waters exactly where I need it to water, which is a huge thing, because when you're using like a sprinkler, for example, you're watering everything, and I don't necessarily want to be watering the things like just the random grasses and I'm just mowing down. I want to focus on putting water, because water is expensive, I want to focus on putting water exactly where the things need water, and then that way I don't have to do as much weeding. That being said, weeds ain't all bad. Weeds do serve, some semblance of a great purpose when you know what you're looking for. So it's a common misconception that people see weeds and they just think, oh, weeds, bad, get them out there. But so many weeds are edible, so many weeds are medicinal. Yes, there's invasive, deadly, poisonous things that you got to be careful about, and I actually have one in my yard, hemlock, which looks kind of like carrot, kind of like parsley, but it's one of the deadliest plants in the world. So I'm still weeding that stuff out, because it seeds itself over the years, gets into the soil. So you can keep weeding stuff, but there's seeds in there. Every time you work the soil, that might end up hitting into a different spot, and then they blossom. So over here I have a different area. This is my potted plants, and I wanted to just try some things in pots, because I know my soil health isn't that great, so I am bringing in some outside soil, and the things that are in pots are doing extremely well, which is pretty cool. This blueberry here, lots of the basil's doing well, the mint's doing really well, cucumbers are starting to kind of take off. So I just wanted to try that out. But I planted this year. This is just a bit of a pollinator area, also like just flowers in general. I do have some little baby eggplants chilling in there. Salvia is great for bees. And I just planted some things I thought were really cool, but I mixed it in with some wild. So this is just wild that just grows here, and I could choose to pull it out. But lamb's quarter is amazing. I did it in my last video. I talked about cooking with lamb's quarter, and it's basically like a wild spinach almost. It's kind of nutty, and it's really delicious. You can see more bees here. Look, there's lots of bees right now. Wow. Oh yeah. I got my nasturtiums. Nasturtiums are they are perennials in the right environment, but in my case they will not be. So that is another big thing to think about. Well, what is going on? So much. It's crazy the amount of creatures and insects when you start planting more and more that come to your place. Like, I never had dragonflies here. I didn't have butterflies my first year, and now I see these beautiful butterflies, because the more biodiversity you have, the more things that you attract. Things that I've never, what is them? Like, I don't even know what these things are called. I saw this crazy bee the other day. It looked like a superhero bee. It was so cool. It was like gold and looked like it was wearing like a cap, like Iron Man's like his suit or something. So anyhow, the more you attract, the more things that you bring in, the more healthy bugs, which is another principle of permaculture. So let's say you are someone who wants to grow food and you're a farmer and you want to grow tomatoes. Well, if you have acre of tomato plants just everywhere, you're basically creating an environment for pests to feast. It's like a smorgasbord. It's like saying to all the pests that eat tomatoes and aphids, hey, there's a party, there's a tomato party, we don't have to go anywhere, there's just endless tomatoes here, let's just go crazy. Now if you have diversity, what happens is you bring in lots of different bugs and insects and things. So you're still going to get the aphids, you're still going to get the things that are going to eat the tomatoes, but now you have the other thing that's going to eat the aphids, so it keeps everything in check. What happens with a lot of farmers is they start to spray. They're like, okay, we've got aphid problem, we need to spray insecticide. But what happens is you kill off the bad bugs you don't want, but you kill off the healthy ones too. And then the bad ones eventually come back, and now they don't have, the thing that's preying on that to sort of, to take it out. So what the best thing to do instead of using insecticides, and yeah, there are things you can do, like I had some sort of issue and I took some baking soda and apple cider vinegar and water and sprayed it on my tomatoes, and there are little things that you can do, but don't just try to wipe out the pest. Even I'm learning, like I have some of those yellow jacket hives, and it's like, yeah, yellow jackets, who wants yellow jackets? They do this, they do that. But when you kill one thing, you take away something else's food that's a good. So you don't want to take away their food, because then you don't have that other beneficial insect or bug or animal or whatever it might be. So finding balance, the more diversity you create, the more that everything just takes care of itself. So maybe you lose a tomato plant to aphids, but then those aphids get wiped out by something good that does this and that, the other thing. So just something to sort of keep in mind. Let's see here. So I'm planning different things. I really like this stuff. This is a lamb's ear or sheep's ear. What's the name of it? I sometimes have the thing. It's lamb's ear. Helen von Stein. This is really soft. It feels like it's like almost like velvety. It's great. Apparently it's like a natural Band-Aid, which is really interesting, and it pops up. So there are certain things that will spread, kind of like mint. If you put mint in the ground, it will start popping up everywhere. So this will kind of become a ground cover, which I'm cool with. I can pull out what I don't want. Asparagus are a great example of a vegetable that is perennial. So a lot of vegetables you have to replant every year or seed. There's asparagus, which if you can see, let's see here, you see there's like these little asparagus growing, like that one. So they will come back year after year, and you'll get producing this once they're like established. You'll get so much asparagus over time. I've got my peach tree here. This one, I talked a bit about it more in the other video, but I pulled the peaches off this year. It didn't really grow that much, which I'm okay with. I think when I first moved here, I really just wanted to have as much fruit as possible, and I had this mentality of like I should just get a lot of peaches, and now I'm just unattached to it. The first couple of years, I might not be supporting myself in food. I can go to farmers markets and do my thing, but it's all about the long term. So over time, I'm gonna start having a lot of food. Like this peach tree this year, it produced pretty well. Let's see, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. There's like 20, 30 peaches on here, and I even took some off already. So that'll be nice. I'll get some peaches. I've also pruned some of the peaches off. I've also opened this tree up. So yesterday I went through here and I clipped off. I didn't do a heavy pruning. That's something you would do more in like the winter time when it's dormant. But I did a light pruning. I kind of looked around the peach tree and I said, certain things are being covered. You want to have good airflow on trees, because when air comes in, it allows everything to breathe. It helps with any infections that could happen. So what I did was I just sort of clipped some things that were kind of not allowing the air to go through. So I was taking care of that. Another thing that I will show you is, and again, this is all play for me. Like I think one day I'll probably live out further out of the city, have some more space. So I'm using this property as like a fun way to grow lots of food, but also learn a lot and make my mistakes here. But mistakes that you make, it's like, don't be afraid to plan. Even though they say in the first year you should just observe, I get that, and I think that's a genius idea if you have the patience. But also, don't be afraid to just put some things in the ground. You can always move them if you know what you're doing. You can take things away. You can just trust. Because the big thing about a forest, like I said, when you walk into a forest, it looks totally random, but there's a perfection to the way a forest grows. When I now, knowing what I know about how soil regenerates and how plants grow and all these things, when I look at a forest, I see the perfection. I see it everywhere. It's like this tree is really tall, so the one under it is more shaded, so it doesn't get as much light, so it's not going to be as big. But then this tree fell over, so now these smaller trees have time to grow up, and then the tree, because that tree fell over, it's all the mulch is breaking down, and it's feeding the rest of the trees. It's like this perfect natural cycle, right? So, you know, what I've come to realize is, yeah, maybe I planted some trees too close to each other, but whatever survives, survives, you know, and what doesn't, doesn't, or what stays small, stays small. If you're not attached to the outcome, you just trust and you learn and you observe, because that's what all life is. Life is about observing. Everything that you've ever, you know, been told or been thought, even if it's scientifically proven and this and that, it's still observation. It's still humans observing things and making judgments based on what they're seeing and what the data shows. But things can change, people can be wrong, people can learn. So one thing that I've been learning about is this thing called fruit guilds. So what you do is you have like kind of a tree, and then around it you plant a lot of companion plants. So for example, I have these pollinator flowers which bring in the bees. So when the bees get attracted here, they're naturally going to pollinate the tree. And then I just had some kale growing because I love kale. I have comfrey, which comfrey is one of like these big things that everyone talks about in permaculture. It's basically this thing that fixes nitrogen. So it goes down deep into the soil, pulls the nitrogen up into the leaves, and then about 3 times a year they say chop and drop. So you basically just, you know, you would cut this plant down and you would put the leaves right around here, and then it's going to naturally fertilize the tree. I also have garlic growing, which is kind of hiding a little bit now from the kale. Kale does get big, you know, that was interesting. But I have garlic growing, and what garlic does is it fends off pests. So everything that you're planting serves a general purpose to help the tree and to kind of create this really cool symbiotic relationship. What else do we have here? I'm going to take you out front. I'll show you a couple things first. Nanking cherry. I got this from Rocky Mountain Permaculture Institute. A really cool cherry tree. I found some wild ones which I cooked with in a video recently. This is a super great producer for cherries. It produces a ton of cherries, but it's like more sort of bushy, so it's not going to become this gigantic cherry tree, which is pretty cool. My plum tree, great example. I have not gotten any plums off here yet, and last year it was probably about this tall, and for some reason that whole piece died off. I cut it off, and now it's kind of producing, as you can see, it's producing this new tree here. Which is pretty cool. I'm just going to let it do its thing. And what's cool about fruit trees, a lot of people don't realize, is you get to shape the fruit tree, especially when it's young. You shape the fruit tree and you can decide how you want it to go. So again, I won't get super into this, but if you look at like this fruit tree, this pear over here, early on I had put some, I kind of tied it down. It was originally up more. So I tied it down to let these branches go straight out. Because what happens is as fruit develops, the branches go down and down and down. So if I can actually train it to be solid this way, well, then it can produce a lot of fruit. And they say in a lot of fruit trees, you don't necessarily want that many limbs. You kind of want this open structure where you have a couple, maybe like 4 or 5 strong producing fruit tree limbs that just go straight out. You know, and like I'm shaping this way, so I have like space that way. That I might have to prune once it starts to hit the fence a little bit, or I can, you know, kind of change the direction of it, and I will just get more fruit. So if you have a couple good strong limbs that produce fruit, you will get a ton of fruit, versus having a tree that you might, like I assumed early on, like I just want as much growth as possible everywhere, but actually when you train the tree the right way, like this is a great example of a limb. As that grows out and gets bigger and bigger and bigger, it will just hold so many peaches really strong. So sorry, peaches, pears. I didn't have any pears this year. I had a couple, but I pulled them off because I'm just letting it focus on its root growth. Let's see. Lovage is another great thing that people use a lot. It actually looks a lot like celery, much stronger. When you smell it, it's like woo, and you can cook with it. But it's also really just it's a great thing people use in permaculture a lot. Actually, I'm forgetting right now. I don't think it's nitrogen, but it does something. I'm being honest, I don't remember. So this is a whole new patch here, which I have some oregano, which oregano will come back year after year and it will spread. So something to be careful about. I'm okay with that. But you know, just know if you put it in the ground, it's going to spread and come back. I had this like African blue basil. This tomato plant's actually looking really healthy. A lot of my tomato plants were not looking very healthy, but this is looking really nice. I'm starting to get some tomatoes. This is the first tomato that's producing. I love having like smaller, like sort of like cherry tomatoes, because you get a lot out of them and you get them pretty early usually. Salvia, not salvia, sativa, stevia. This is pretty wild. People always freak out when they try this. I like to grow a lot of sort of more medicinal kind of weird things that people are like, whoa, because this is sweet. When you eat this leaf, it literally tastes sweet and your mind gets tripped out. I've got some hazelnut over here, which is, it looked like it wasn't going to make it, but it's starting to grow some new leaves, and I think it will be okay. I have these June berries. I have 2 bushes. These are great. I got a bunch of berries this year. I pulled the berries off of this tree because I just wanted it to focus on getting strong, but I had 2 trees, so I did a little experiment. I didn't pull it off on those. I ate them. They were delicious. They're kind of like these big, they almost look like blueberries. Some can be small, but you find these in the wild a lot. So these are great. They're also called Saskatoon. Another name is serviceberry. There's this weed. These vines are always growing up. So one note about the plum trees, I was kind of disappointed not getting plums this year. And then I found behind my house, behind the mulberry tree over there, which we have this gigantic mulberry tree, as you can see, that produces so much. Behind it, there's a gigantic kind of wild plum tree. So I was like, well, that's cool. So I'll take it. Over here, you'll notice there's lamb's quarter. There's also just different flowers. I didn't plant any of this. This is all me working with what's already here. I don't want to just come in and just take away all of what's already naturally here. I want to strike a balance of bringing in things that I want, but also allowing the things that naturally grow here to have a place too, because this is also a great environment for lots of bugs and spiders and things to live, and they can live out here and they can have the environment that they need, and also be just comfortable, in sort of like their little wild area. So I try to have some areas around the house that are like this. Then I have 2 cherry trees. I have a Bing cherry, which I planted because I went to the farmer's market and I was buying these cherries, and they're so good. And the cherry season is starting to end right now, but they were so delicious, but they were so expensive. It was like $10 for a pound or whatever it was. And I was like, you know what, I'm gonna go plant a Bing cherry tree. So I got that cherry in. I also have a Stella cherry. Another thing to note about fruit trees is that some fruit trees need pollinators. Like you need at least 2 apple trees. Peaches are self-pollinating, although the more you have, you'll still get more. So it's good to have 2, but you don't need 2 peaches. That being said, I have peaches and apples and stuff all around the neighborhood, so I don't necessarily need to have as much diversity, because certain bees will go to that tree that's nearby and then come pollinate mine. Cherries, sweet cherries need a pollinator. Sour cherries do not, so that's something to keep in mind. Stella is the only sort of sweet-ish cherry that doesn't need a pollinator. That's why I got it originally, but then I just wanted to get a second one anyway. So originally the idea was just to have everything outside, but then I ended up kind of bringing stuff to the front, and I'm not going to get super into it right now, but I've started to plant a lot of, this is actually where most of the growth is happening. Squash, pumpkin, I've got watermelon, I've got cantaloupe, honeydew, a lot of stuff out there, and that area is just completely sheet mulched. So your best friend, if you don't have good soil, is going to be sheet mulching, and it's basically a concept where you take things like cardboard or newspaper, and you mow your weeds down, you cover them with cardboard and newspaper, you add compost to that, and then you just cover that with a whole bunch of wood chips. And once you do that, it smothers all the weeds, and it just over time builds healthy soil. You wet it. As it breaks down, the cardboard keeps the weeds at bay, and that will slowly break down. The mulch breaks down, gets into the soil, and it just builds really healthy soil and an amazing environment. And that's a huge thing that I've been doing all over the place. So something to think about, something to consider. Now I have a lot of other plants around here, but that is a huge part. I just wanted to give you a little bit of a tour, kind of what I'm working on. Oh, I do want to show you. I totally forgot two important areas. Hey, Frida. Hey, Frida. So I just put this in, Siberian pea shrub. It's a nitrogen fixer. This is great because as the leaves fall, it will fix the nitrogen. You can kind of throw the leaves around the property. I've got lemongrass, which I'll have to replant. I've got rhubarb, which is another great thing, perennial, that will keep coming back year after year. I have 2 rhubarb plants now. My collards are growing really well over here. This is a smaller pear tree, and I just actually kind of started to train this yesterday. So it's good to, if you're going to train these guys, you want to make sure that it's they're nice and limber. So in the summer is a good time, especially I find pear limbs in general are really just nice and limber. So I'm starting to train that out a little bit. This will be a pretty cool pear. It's a kaffir pear tree. So I'm also doing some more experimental things. This is a pomegranate, which is starting to do pretty well. I planted it this year, so it's still small, but it's a Russian hardy pomegranate, which is pretty cool, because if I could grow pomegranates in Colorado, my mind would be blown. I also do have a couple of bananas that are in the ground already, that are doing okay. When the hail comes, they get destroyed, but they come back pretty well. Some more tomatoes growing. I have some mint that will be invasive and start to pop up everywhere, but I'm cool with that. Wards off pests, and it breaks up soil. I have 2 fig trees out here. I have 2 in the back. These are also hardy figs. Same with the bananas. They're all hardy, which means that they can grow in cold environments. So these figs, they die back down. They come back every year. If I cover them, I have a better chance of getting figs, but letting them grow up. I have some grapes vining here. I have some hops over here. A couple blueberries in the ground. Blueberries don't do super well here, especially with our soil. There are things you can do about that, but I haven't had the time. I have strawberries all growing here, which are kind of slow growing, starting to take off a bit. I have some gooseberries, some currants, and just so much stuff. And the last thing that I will show you is my newest project. And alert, yes, there is marijuana plant, but I'm not growing it for the flower, for the smoking situation. I'm actually growing this because I've been told that the leaves, and I'm being totally honest, I've been told that the leaves are really good and edible, and I've tried them. They're good, they're nutty. So these, because it is literally called weed, it's a weed, so it will grow like crazy if you're under the right conditions. And then I have all these really edible marijuana leaves, which I want to cook with, and I'm doing a party I'd hopefully I get a chance to cook with. But the reason I want to show you this bed, you can see things are starting to pop up all over, this is what's known as hugelkultur. And hugelkultur is this really interesting concept. This guy, I think his name is Hugel something, I don't know, but this guy came with this concept where you sort of dig a little bit of a ditch, and there's different ways to do it, but the general idea is dig a little bit of a ditch, put in a ton of branches and logs, and some can be decaying logs and pieces of wood and branches from trees. Put that down, then cover it. Some people will cover it with compost. I actually had been making, I have my compost bins over here, so I had been using this as composting. I put all the compost that was in there, the stuff that was broken down, the stuff that was not, I covered that, and then I covered it with some soil, which actually organic soil I brought in. Then I planted like a lot of nitrogen fixers like clover and some other random. I got this packet of a mixture of like mostly clover with some like flax and amaranth and a couple different things, and I just threw it in there. And the idea is you water it initially, but it's supposed to be like a self-watering bed. So what happens is, as the tree limbs start to break down, they will hold water and moisture, and they will also hold lots of nutrients. And as they break down, the nutrients release into the soil, and you create this really powerful, like supercharged bed, all completely organic, and ultimately not having to water it. So I thought that'd be really cool. I actually just dug all this up, and I had a ton of old trees, and I cut them up and threw them in there. So we'll see how that goes. I also have now these more open compost bins. I've been using this, and I don't have anything in there right now because I cleared it out for the hugelkultur, but I'm now using these bins. I kind of have to go back there still and clean it out to give it some more airflow. But the idea behind this, I had these just sort of old like fencing, and it was part of the house, and I'm just doing a mixture, it's green things to brown things, to have carbon, nitrogen, and the idea is that because it's open, I water it every once in a while. I even honestly peed on it because I hear that can help supercharge it, but the idea, because it's open, I don't have to turn it, so that just kind of slowly breaks down over the next few months, and I'll have really good compost. So I'm still learning. I'm sure I've made lots of mistakes, and you might see things and be like, what the heck are you doing? But to me, it's all about the learning process, and my mind is continually expanding. I know much more than most people who don't know anything because I'm in it, but of course I'm not an expert. I'm okay with that, because to me what's fun is the learning process. Every day learning new things, making mistakes, learning from my mistakes, growing, trying new things, taking risks, being present with the plants. It's become so much fun. So I hope this gave you a little bit of a nice overview of my little food forest paradise out here, and subscribe if you'd like, and I'll see you soon.